No mai haere mai, time for another caucus meeting, everybody. The fun one, though, not the boring political caucus meetings that actual politicians have. It's just after 11 a.m. on Thursday. Time to kick off another discussion about the week on the campaign trail. I'm Tim Watkin.
I'm Lisa Owen.
I'm Guy Espiner.
And kia ora, I'm Scott Campbell.
Kia ora. Kia te pai, let's get into it. I want to start by thanking all of you folk who watched on YouTube last week, the thousands of you. Very nice to see you out there, but of course we're on the podcast still. You can listen to us on Spotify, Google, all those usual places, but also find us now on YouTube.
You're sounding like a politician.
Oh, stop it. Okay, I'll stop. Move on.
Are you sure about those numbers?
Look, I just want this out by lunchtime.
It wasn't hundreds, was it?
No, it was thousands. I mean, a few thousand. Let's start with poll this week because we just want to talk about the parties. Colmar Brunton, One News poll. Labour on 48, down 5. National on 31. ACT on 7, which is looking at 9 MPs potentially for David Seymour. The Greens on 6. New Zealand First on 2. New Conservatives on 2 as well. Top Māori Party and Advanced New Zealand all on 1. About 14% of undecideds. The poll ran from last Thursday until Tuesday night. What did you, Guy, and you had some thoughts?
Well, obviously ACT is the bolter in this campaign, and that's shown in that poll, and we can pick over the entrails of that poll because it is interesting. But for me, the really interesting political story right of the moment is that two of the parties who are effectively in the coalition at the moment have targets on their back or crosshairs on their foreheads, and that's the Greens and New Zealand First. You've got Judith Collins saying to ACT, wipe out Winston Peters. Now, that was the unspoken strategy in 2017, cut out the middleman, I think is a phrase you might remember.
That's
right.
But
it was unspoken, because they may have to have gone to the negotiation table with Winston Peters, and so they didn't really want to say, hey, we want to kill you first.
But they had that, and that was the problem, was that they wanted to negotiate afterwards. And
and they didn't realise that he'd filed court papers against them, but that's all history.
Exactly.
But this time it's explicit, and I heard Judith Collins say it again today. I talked to David, and you've got 2 jobs, to win Epsom and to kill off Winston Peters. So it's very explicit and quite a high-risk strategy because you really are poking the bear there. So it's quite interesting that she's saying that she wants to kill off Winston Peters. So any talk about, National might go with Winston Peters, it seems like that door was firmly closed.
Yeah.
And as for the Greens, you've got Shane Jones saying, I'm going to do everything I can to get rid of the Green Party. So to me, that's really interesting that those two parties who now enjoy appointments in the executive, one out, one inside the cabinet, both being targets for a political assassination.
Yeah, supposedly government friends at the moment, but coming for each other. That comment from Shane Jones came on The Nation on the weekend. Let's have a listen to that.
Are you upset that Labor isn't giving you a hand this time around?
Oh, look, I thoroughly understand where the Prime Minister is coming from. They want Labor to govern by themselves. The first time ever that a party under MMP will have exclusive power and control over the executive. I think there's a host of people in Labor who find Greens more agreeable than myself, which is why I'm going to do everything I can to ensure the Greens don't survive.
Yeah, I found it interesting also this week that the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern on the campaign trail was talking about it's easier to get things across the line when you don't have to work with others. And just to see this sort of falling out of those governing parties is amazing. You've got the Greens who are sitting there doing everything they can to show a Greens-Labour government that's coming. You've got New Zealand First, like Brian says, trying to get rid of the Greens and paint the picture that they are really bad. And, it went even further, I think, Shane Jones, in that interview and in others, to say, expose what James Shaw had done and going back to the table and asking for more money for that Green School in New Plymouth. And then you've got the feeling between the Greens, and I'm not sure if our viewers and listeners saw it this week, but that press conference where James Shaw was asked again about the Green School, and then Marama Davison came in next and shut down the press conference, and it was just this ugly feeling.
The look on her face, actually, I saw the end of that clip, Lisa. That did not look good. I mean, Shane Jones has been bagging the Greens for years, right? And Molly Hawkes and all that stuff. So there's
nothing new there. They have been going the Greens for ages. And when Guy talks about poking the bear, meaning New Zealand First and, the big daddy bear, Winston Peters, is he in hibernation right now? I mean, in terms of what we're hearing and seeing
Might
from the
have popped
campaign.
outside the cave for a durry,
Yeah.
actually, to be
Those
fair.
discounted cigarettes he's after.
Yeah, from what we're seeing on the campaign trail, they're not getting much oxygen. And even though that was kind of the killer line from Shane Jones, arguably, in that News Hub Nation debate, it was kind of like he needed to be poked away during that. And Willow Jean Prime owned a lot of that conversation. In terms of the numbers in this poll, really interesting around ACT. So yesterday on Checkpoint, we kind of introduced ourselves to numbers 6 through 9. And we were like, who are these people? Because that's what a lot of people will be asking on the numbers that David Seymour is getting. There's potentially going to be 9 of them in there.
So what do we know about them?
Yeah, well, this is interesting. Dr. James McDowell, like National's got Dr. Shane, they've got Dr. James, but he's not actually a medical doctor. He works with his wife in an immigration business. He works for an NGO. He's studying law at Waikato University. Karen Chaw, she's number 7. 4 kids, self-employed, works in the clothing industry. Mark Cameron, self-described cow cocky from Northland, talks about the fact
the most rural MP New Zealand would ever have, David Seymour says.
Most genuine, most authentic, and a real critical thinker, says David Seymour. And
uncritically.
Yeah, he's an interesting character. He has struggled with mental health earlier in his farming days, so he talks about that. He also talks about how he thinks the rural sector is being dissed and run down and disrespected. And then a woman called Toni Severin, who was absolutely joyous about being on the campaign bus with David Seymour at the time I caught up with her.
Chemist, or?
She used to be a lab technician.
Lab technician, yes.
And she now has her own business. She likes crafting. She makes wreaths. And she thinks Jacinda Ardern's done an okay job, but, ACT would do better. But these are the people that would come in with David Seymour. And people need to start sort of, going on websites and clicking and seeing what they're getting for their vote.
Yeah, and Judith Collins actually mentioned that this morning, I think, in some of the media, like Guyan was saying. She was talking up this relationship or this working relationship with David Seymour, but then she also said, but we don't really know who the other people are a little bit further down. So almost like this, vote for both of us, but be careful on who you get.
Well, because think about where that 7% is coming from ACT. Part of that's coming from National. She was saying, it's all New Zealand First. It's just New Zealand First vote that they're taking, but they're taking some from National as well.
I think she was trying to say, vote for ACT, but not too much.
No, exactly.
I'd like them to get, 4 or 5 MPs, but possibly not 8 or 9.
Let's just make this point. If you look at that poll and you put National and ACT vote together, it still doesn't start with a 4. It does not still start with a 4.
There's no credible path to victory on that poll for National.
That is hugely problematic for them.
For National to have a path to victory, you need ACT to stay at 7 and National to gain 10 points.
Yeah.
So that's what you need without eating into any of that ACT Party vote. So that does show you how far away they are. Look, it could have been a lot worse. National psychologically would have been happy to see a 3 in front of it, but it was barely that at 31.
Yeah.
But there's no credible path for victory at the moment for a National-led government.
The other interesting thing about that poll, I thought, was the wasted vote potential. And you've got so many parties sitting there on 1%. You're talking about maybe 7% of the vote wasted in there. And Scott, I know you're still talking about the Greens stumbling and not making it. That would go into double figures potentially of wasted vote if the Greens don't make it. So you're talking about the major party only needing, mid to late 40s to govern alone potentially.
And the other interesting figure in all of that, 14% undecided.
Yeah.
That's a big wodge of
that's
voters.
fairly standard.
Yeah.
Around that.
10 to 14 is pretty typical, isn't
pretty
it?
much, yeah.
Yes, but when you look at how the numbers lie, that's a critical 14%.
It is, but I've looked a lot at this in the past, and usually the academic thinking around that is that will largely fall into the similar makeup that those numbers have already. In other words, I explained that terribly, but
like special votes and advance votes.
In other words,
it matches whatever's there.
Yeah, in other words, Labor may get 48% of those 14% undecideds and carry the mass through.
But that's that concern for Labor though, dropping 5. If what it shows is that almost this love for Jacinda Ardern and this love for essentially the job that the government has done of keeping us safe in a health perspective, is that starting to come off? And they wouldn't want to see it to drop any further. I think I'm still in the mindset that they'll be hitting around about that 44, 46%. I think the Greens are and maybe I'll be one of those ones to put on the table now, but I think the Greens are gone.
Is that right? Really?
See, I don't.
So
I still don't.
let
Yeah,
him
no,
go
no,
on
no,
this,
no,
because
no,
I don't agree. So
if they're polling at the moment at 5-6%, traditionally they have never done well on election day, and they've always polled higher getting up to it. I just think that they need their people to get out of bed on election day and go and vote. The polls are open in 8 days now, and they'll need every one of their people out.
wow, I think, yeah, I can see that. I see what you're saying, and I can see the polls. Obviously, they're close. My feeling is that they will get back. I think there's enough of the base and the Greens to get them back, and I do think that the confidence that left voters have that Jacinda Ardern's party has enough numbers that they will allow themselves to vote Green, and it would have been in a tight race they may have been squeezed out. My own view is that the Greens will get back.
Well, I found it really interesting, the poll in Auckland Central. Over the weekend it was. I'm just trying to think, the days all merge into one. But it was Auckland Central over the weekend, which is Chloe Swarbrick, right? So the Greens, they either get 5% or they pin their chances to someone winning an electorate. And there's been a lot of big talk about Chloe Swarbrick in Auckland Central. Poll on the weekend, third place.
I know.
Yeah.
I was surprised.
Yeah, and with the Labour candidate, Helen White, she was on almost twice as much as everybody else. So that whole idea that left voters might throw the Greens a bit of a lifeline, it ain't playing out in Auckland Central if you believe that poll.
True. And if you look at you really need to be so explicit about electorates and seat deals. You can't just assume stuff like that. The seats, unless you have your cup of tea and go and a leader basically hands over the seat to someone, the seats will usually be within 20-30% of the general swing. And the swing is towards, the Labour-led government at the moment with Jacinda for the past couple of terms.
Tim, do you think Greens will make it back?
No, yeah, I do. Yeah. I think I agree with you that the Greens do really well when Labour is really weak or really strong. And when Labour's looking quite strong at the moment, people will feel free on the left to go, okay, they'll sit. I'd rather have Labour at 44 and the Greens at 7 than Labour at 48 and the Greens at 4, kind of thing. I think that's where that'll break down.
It's going to make it a pretty ugly next couple of weeks, right? When you've got New Zealand First doing all they can to get rid of the Greens.
Yeah.
And it's going to get messy. And so much for being a kind campaign that we were all talking about potentially at the start of this.
Well, because the leaders, this is one interesting thing about the potential for wasted vote and the hit jobs on these things, is because we've got leaders of all these parties without safe seats. I mean, Seymour's got Epsom, and that's where people are obviously feeling comfortable to vote for him. But New Zealand First does not have a seat. The Greens do not have a seat. And so unlike, say, back when you had United Future and Peter Dunn, and you had Winston Peters and Tauranga, and you had...
And the Māori Party
Party with a safe seat. You could vote for those minor parties and not feel your vote was going to get wasted. But there's a different calculation this time.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, in the polling vacuum that we've been running on, we haven't had the regular polling, so people have been flying blind in terms of where the parties actually are.
Yeah.
I presume we're going to get more in the last couple of weeks. But
so,
do you know what?
I mean,
I found one of the things I found really interesting about this week, and I think the polls show it with Acton David Seymour, and depending on who you're talking to, where does that vote come from? And people have been talking about it's the gun community and the likes, but I actually think he's starting, and I may have touched on this last week. He's starting to sound somewhat sensible, and I think even in a debate this week, he came across as actually being fairly. Clear in his messaging. He's a long way from what he was a few years back when he first came into Parliament.
And he's got a sense of humour, right?
Well, let's hear exactly. You guys are making good points. We've got a grab to make that exact point of David Seymour at the Queenstown debate for the Chamber of Commerce down there this week.
And stop comparing ourselves with the worst. He just said, if you've been to Melbourne, let's start comparing ourselves with the other 5 or 6 states that are doing really well, Grant, and aspire to be better, rather than comparing ourselves with the worst and using fear from the podiumocracy, Grant. We actually need to ask how we can deal with the debt. I've got more young people coming to my meetings, some of them toddlers, and I think they're worried about the debt. I think I think they've read the pre-fu and they know that they're going to get a driver's licence and maybe go to university before this guy sees the New Zealand government balance a budget, because they got 15 years of deficits coming down the track.
That's a pretty good message.
Yeah, maybe some of those toddlers did the numbers for Paul Goldsmith. But it's interesting, isn't it? Because we don't see a lot of character in New Zealand politics. And who's the guy we always see that sort of stuff from is Winston Peters. And it feels that people have seen a lot of that and aren't as interested this time, if I could put it charitably. And so they're looking at Seymour and seeing here's this guy who's relatively young and to them probably newish, and it speaks with some passion and some charisma and some fun, and he's witty and sharp. So he's really is capturing more imagination this time, isn't he?
That's a real. I mean, because that's a bottom line point he's trying to push on debt. It's the fiscal responsibility line that any kind of right wing party wants to push on. But he did it with this great a great humour about toddlers, and you could hear the audience just coming alive to it. He's cutting through in a way that Winston used to, and he's the clown prince in that regard, and the pretender, isn't he?
Of course, they're really going to run into problem when they get into Parliament, because they've grafted on the gun lobby, and you can see neoliberalism and hunting, shooting, fishing don't always coalesce, and so they'll run into problems. And who knows? Lisa's had a closer look than I at who's on that list, but you do wonder if there's another David Garrett in there or something.
That's right.
He'll message someone on Twitter.
That United, the United Future lot that came in '93 with all the.
Well, one of them. Well, yeah, or even.
I'm sure these ones are probably a bit better than that.
Yeah, well, one of them coming in 2002 for United Future hadn't got her citizenship sorted because they were so surprised they got so many MPs.
That's right.
Kelly Charl, I think was her name.
I mean, a bunch of these guys just almost fell off their chairs when they saw the polls on the night, thinking, actually, I could be there, which was interesting. And I know the numbers don't add up, but in respect of David Seymour, it was interesting to hear Judith Collins speaking today about what his role would be. If he brings in 9...
He would be in cabinet.
He would be in cabinet, and she was asked whether that earns him the right to be the Deputy Prime Minister, and she was sort of saying, well, David's not unreasonable. We'd have a chat about things, but he'd play a different role. He would be in cabinet, whereas previously he didn't want to do that because he was pushing his
But it just ain't going to happen, is it? Well, you can't say it's never going to happen, but they don't really have a credible path to victory, and I can't see ACT going up any further without eroding National's vote further, right?
No.
It's a big bucket on the centre-right, and if you pour a bit more into the ACT bucket, it's at this point going to come from National. We've talked about how they've probably pulled some vote from New Zealand First, they've probably pulled some vote from elsewhere, but I would have thought north of 7 they're going to start pulling votes from National, and that doesn't help the centre-right.
The reason why ACT is doing so well, presumably, is that people on the right are saying National's not going to win, it's not actually that close, so I'm going to vote with my heart rather than my strategy head. I can actually vote for people. If it was really that close and you're on the centre-right, you'll try to get your lot into power. But
well, these are the votes that New Zealand First is trying to get, saying, hey, National can't win. But they aren't going to New Zealand First. They're going to
But he's doing it a different way, right? So, and I guess this is where you see the differences between New Zealand First and ACT. New Zealand First is essentially saying we will put the handbrake on. We will be the ones who are the insurance policy if there's a Labour government, and we've done that for the last 3 years. Whereas what Seymour is talking about, and I quite like it how he did this, he said, let's compare ourselves to the best, not to the worst. Let's try and be positive about it. And I actually think that that's a good message for him to take. If we're there, we'll be progressive.
It's really interesting how the parties are managing MMP and potential coalition discussions. Also interested this week to hear the Greens and their negotiating strategy. Would the wealth tax be a bottom line or not? Well, according to Julianne Ginger, it would be. And then according to James Shaw the next day, we don't do bottom lines.
No, I want to pull the handbrake on that one, because to use a phrase...
Go Winston, be the handbrake.
No, to use a phrase that you would have used and someone you've interviewed many times has used, words matter, right? So
Let's hold out here. So
words matter, because I went back and listened to Julianne Ginger, and she used the words. It's a good roll call. Hang on. She used the words. She didn't talk about wealth tax. She said tax reform has to be a bottom line. She didn't specify that would be specifically the wealth tax or a higher personal tax bracket. So it was more generalised than that. I believe it was, a misspeak on her part, given the Greens' position. But also, it is correct to say that the Greens do not have bottom lines because every policy is consensus decision. So you got to get on the Zoom and get everyone to agree to it. So you can't actually say that this is my bottom line, even as leader of the party or an MP in that party, because you require consensus to get it over the line.
But just to repeat what I said on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, when Robertson announced Labor's tax policy and said we're not going to go negotiate on that with the Greens, we're not going to get to try and see off that. The Greens, look, people within the Greens are very clear. That's one of the first things they are going to talk to Labor about if they do make it over 5.
You get in there and scrap for your policies. Otherwise,
tax
why
does
are you
matter
there?
to them.
And tax
so
does
whatever
matter
Robertson
to them.
says, he's going to have to negotiate on tax if the Greens are there.
But it's interesting listening to James Shaw, and you put up a better argument than James Shaw, because I just listened to him talk to Susie Ferguson for 10 minutes today, and he didn't defend her in that way. He had a whole interview based on the fact that
he said it was a mistake
and she was
pressure.
very, very passionate, and that's
she was
fine.
tired.
That's fine. But my point was going to be, it does matter if you're saying this before the election rather in the negotiating room. Because if I was hovering around the left, going, why would I vote for the Greens? Let's say my top priorities as a voter was the wealth tax and reducing inequality and stuff. That may lead me to vote for the Greens instead of Labor if I thought these guys are seriously going to look at a wealth tax and they're going to push for that and saying they're not going to be part of the government if that doesn't happen. Otherwise, I might as well just vote for Labor.
Exactly. So I don't think the Greens are concerned that Jen is saying this stuff at all, right? I don't think it's a real problem.
I don't know why they didn't pull her back, but
they'll say no, Julian, you shouldn't have said that. But it's a pro forma thing. They want people to know that they're going to push hard in this area.
Arguably, it creates a bigger problem for Labor because they've already said that we are not going to change any other
17 times in response
rate.
to your questions.
Yeah. We're not going to change our position on tax. This is it. We're promising you one income tax shift, and we're not going to introduce any other new taxes. Now, there's always that strategy after the fact where you say we work with what the New Zealand voting public has delivered to us. But can you imagine the cannon fodder that would provide? They can't move
Scott,
on that position.
No, but and you know what? Thankfully and finally, we are starting to talk about something that is different between all of these parties because, for the last 6 weeks or so that we've been in Caucus, we've been talking about COVID and the response to COVID, and nothing really different. And I think, at least these parties are trying to come up with something different. We're 8 days, 19 hours, 26 minutes, and 34 seconds away from the polls opening. And finally, we've got some discussion.
Have you got a clock there?
I've got a clock.
You got a CNN countdown.
I love it.
CNN countdown thing.
I've got the real numbers.
So, Scotty,
I go to Goldsmith for my numbers. Sorry, Paul. I just, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
Go, Lisa,
I just want to ask Scotty because of what he said. So, last Friday, when National unveiled, and it seems like a million days ago, unveiled its tax policy, but it's less than a week ago. Were you surprised?
I actually think it was good that they went and had a go at something. They needed to throw some numbers out there, right? Tax cuts is going to be the only thing that will give them an opportunity.
But they said no tax cuts.
Yeah,
they said no tax cuts, and they
went, we're
going to be responsible, no tax cuts. Here are some tax cuts.
But then they also had the ability to say we need to stimulate the economy, right? And we're in a really bad place, and the numbers show how bad it's going to get over the next little while. And 100,000 people who are estimated to be going on the dole queue or on the unemployment benefits, the longer this tax discussion goes on for, the better it is for National, because people will start to think, what does that $50 look like in my back pocket? I think they had to have a Hail Mary, right? And it was always going to be tax cuts.
But for me, that was the first surprise of the campaign.
And I agree with Scott that it's a legitimate argument. To introduce introduce tax cuts as an economic stimulus, and it's what you'd expect from a national government, right? And Labor's raising taxes a little bit, and again, you'd expect the redistributive approach from Labor. To me, the unforgivable thing was getting the numbers wrong. An egregious and dreadful error.
So this is
So
so irritating. This is the Hail Mary, right? As you say, they had one play. The clock's running down. The quarterback Judith Collins gets the ball, snap, goes to the wide receiver Paul Goldsmith, and this happens.
Well, thanks for coming along this afternoon. As Grant Robertson helpfully pointed out, we based our fiscal plan on contributions to the super fund based on the budget figures. It turned out there was a slight change with the pre-FU figures, the pre-election fiscal update figures, the result of which is that instead of the Nationals plan getting our net debt as a country back to 35% of GDP in 2034, we go to 36% of GDP. This is in marked contrast, of course, with the government's plan, which means that we're still at 48% of GDP at that time frame.
Have you gone back and checked all of your other figures?
Yep, look, this is a irritating mistake. We missed it, and our external checker missed it as well, and that's a mistake that we made.
That was a cluster of a different kind, So I just think the thing was it was a $4 billion error, and Judith Collins, the day after that, she really tried to throw shade on everything else, talking about Treasury having made mistakes in its printed copy, yippity-yappity. Immaterial. They made a mistake, and it was a $4 billion one. Mm-hmm. They used an old figure, as they stated. But they really tried to play it down by saying it only makes a 1% difference to the debt track, right?
And that does look true by the numbers.
Yeah, that's true. But here's the comparison I would use if I was asking him about it. You unveiled $4.6 billion worth of tax cuts last week, and you told us they were massive. That was massive. Right?
Yep.
Massive. A massive number and a massive stimulus package.
Ignite the economy, Lisa.
Ignite the economy, Tim Watkin. And guess what? Those two figures aren't that far apart. So they're either both massive or they're both immaterial.
To be fair, one's over 18 months and one's over 15 years.
Yes. Yeah, that is true.
And the trackers, I mean, the trackers that they're still going to pay back the debt a hell of a lot quicker than Labour's planning to, which is their key message.
But you don't turn up and say you are the economic managers. You cannot trust these people. They don't get their figures right. They are not the stewards for the economy. We are. Whoops, basic calculating area. Sorry about that. Irritating.
And that's the problem, right? When you're out there and your billboards say, stronger team, strong economy, trust us, we're the people who know to get us out of the financial issue. Bit of a problem there. You also know, and all of you sitting around that table, when a journalist asks you, have you gone and checked the rest of your numbers? You might want a quick smart get outside and go and check them, right? It's not a good thing.
It's not a good... Yeah.
No, that's the one that you use so that when you come back, you've got a benchmark. Like when you say, do you stand by all your earlier statements on X, Y, Z?
I mean, I think in the final wash-up, okay, you can argue 35% of GDP, and you can forgive that to some degree. But I think it's reflective, isn't it, of... National's done a lot to show us that they're not ready, in my view, because they've had three leadership changes. You think of the staff that have come and gone. I've heard stories about, people hitting delete on basic templates before they've gone. The campaign managers changed from Paula Bennett to Jerry Brownlee. Key staff have gone, and Matthew Hooton, and God knows what he's up to at the moment, and God knows what he was doing. But you've got a whole bunch of expertise and knowledge walking out the door, and they rushed that out. Okay, you had the preview, and then on the Friday they rushed the numbers out. They could have spent another few days going through this. I think would have Stephen Joyce, who's finally found his fiscal hole, by the way. Would that party have done it? It wouldn't have probably happened in government, so I don't think people need to freak out and go, oh my God, these guys are going to crash the plane. No. But it's reflective to me of, and someone made the comment, Lisa, that they weren't going to cut taxes. So the lead had changed. Judith Collins said no tax cuts. Then suddenly they had to cut taxes, And so what I get is, and I haven't been following the campaign day, like say Lisa has, because I haven't been, so I'm looking at it more from above this time, and I'm seeing the perception that must be given is, gee, these guys are a little bit all over the place. They're throwing the ball around and they're dropping it.
Well, I think they score, and then there's an own goal the next day. Score, own goal. And because so much has happened, we forget. Michael Woodhouse, right? He brings to our attention that there's a problem with managed isolation, and then he starts talking about a homeless guy who slipped into a hotel, right? So goal, own goal, and then we have this situation where the leaked information comes out, Michelle Bogue, and then they lose Nikki Kay and Amy Adams. We forget that. All of that has happened over such a short, compact time. Todd Muller goes, out of the blue, and then you have another leadership wrangle. So every time they seem to be getting on top of things, then the next day there's a blunder. So the big hurrah over the tax cuts. A few days later,
it's a classic weird momentum thing, isn't it? Where sometimes in luck, fortune favours the bold and all that. It just seems to be they can't really catch a break. Doesn't seem to be.
But it's one of those things where you make your own luck, right? It is the preparation and the organisation around it, and you want people to, the one thing you want people to remember is $50 a week more in your pocket, right? That's the thing. All people remember after the past weekend is they got their numbers wrong.
Yeah.
And people don't remember $50. They remember Goldsmith can't count.
Well, and he's not from Ngāti Porou.
Yeah, and it's details, and details matter, right? Just like words matter. And I think, and they've set themselves up as trying to be the party who will get the details right. And you're never going to get everything right. And Guyan pointed out before, Prefu came out the day before, and that's a huge document for people to be going through, and people are going to miss numbers. But when you're putting yourself forward as that party, it doesn't look good, right?
Scott, let's just Scott play a game.
Why did they rush it out on the Friday? They could have checked it over on the weekend. I mean, they didn't have to. We've been quite fair to them. But they, so the only time pressure there, Scott's right, so the preview comes out and they only had a day, and they've been saying, we only had a day. Well, no, you created the timeline.
Yeah.
And as former political journalists, you two, Guyon and Scotty, Friday, dead zone, wouldn't you not have taken it to the Sunday, dropped it in the afternoon, led all the bulletins, and been the talking point
especially
on the Monday news shows?
Your campaign launch,
which was a disaster because of that very reason.
Yeah, I guess what they
and it comes back to the staffing stuff. Strategically woeful.
Yeah, I guess what they were trying to probably leverage off was the momentum of the Prefu books being so bad, right? And they would have known that all of the commentary and all of the media coverage would have been about the how bad we were. And you've got Grant Robertson on one hand saying, well, it's not as bad as we thought it was going to be, and all of the commentators saying it's pretty bad. And then you've got National trying to leverage off that. And I think they should have taken their time. They had the opportunity. To me, it feels a little bit like they don't quite know who they are at the moment. And
Scott, I mean, just talk about who they are, because you talked about the team and exactly National is the way it positions the party. But play guess who with me on this one. A lawyer, a historian and a political studies graduate who was the Cook Islands' first head of mission to the EU. Who are those three people? That's that's the National Party's. That's the National Party's Economic Brains Trust. You've got Judith Collins, who is a lawyer, to be fair, with a master's in tax, but a lawyer. You've got Paul Goldsmith, who's a historian, who, to be fair, wrote a book about tax, but is an author, and then you've got Todd McClay, who was a commission head for the Cook Islands. But this is the problem for them, I think. Now, this is not the party of John Key, Bill English, Stephen Joyce, right? You look at those three, the leader, the finance spokesperson, the economic development spokesperson. You knew, Stephen Joyce failed all his, out of his 10 economic papers at university.
But also built an incredible business.
But built, was
a genuine
entrepreneur.
He was. But to be fair on all that, and you could go through them all, but Michael Cullen was really an historian and an academic, and was largely seen as running pretty good books over his time, and is certainly a very, very smart man. And Grant Robertson as well did not have an economics background.
No.
But look, that's the job of a politician, but like a lawyer. A lawyer will say, I can take a good brief.
Yeah.
And that's what Robertson's done. And he started with not a lot of knowledge, but has schooled himself up. So I take your point.
It's just different from the National Party. When people look at the National Party, they're looking at a different National Party, right? That doesn't quite give them the edge they had.
We found out a little bit more, though, about Judith Collins this week. I didn't realise that she had links to Matamata and in farming and a few other bits and pieces.
Let's talk about the debate, because, that's the other big event this week, right? The One News debate on Tuesday night. And look, you mentioned Judith Collins there. She did first for the challenger, the first debate's always key. You have lower expectations from the person who's the incumbent. You get to stand alongside the incumbent for the first time and look relatively equal. So always the big opportunity. And you get the chance to introduce yourself. So here's what Judith Collins said in terms of some of the bits she talked about, her personal story and bits about herself coming out.
Well, Fili, I understand, actually. My husband is Samoan, so Talofa, and he was actually taken out of school when he was 15, ran away to his auntie, who took him back so he could go to school. And that's what happens for many kids who have got a lot of pressure on them because their parents don't have enough money for them.
And of course,
and what we're
no
hearing
one's
from
going to
small
deny
business
that.
owners, and I was one, is that they can't afford constant increases in the minimum wage. A lot of these state houses have been around since the 1950s and 60s.
And they were good builds.
Actually, no, they were not. They were not. Actually, what I grew up in was it was basically a state house. I tell you what, no, they didn't have insulation and the windows didn't shut. Tracy, thank you for that question. I'm a daughter of Mata dairy farmers as well.
Yeah, I think that was interesting. If you didn't know those things about Judith Collins, I was aware of the fact that she came from a farming background. I thought it was interesting that she pulled herself up when she was about to say mata and said mata. And she's from a farming family. She has owned small businesses, and if anyone's interested, one of them was a restaurant and the other one is her own personal lawyering business. And when she talked about living in what was, pretty much a state house, I think she's referencing the farmhouse that she grew up on. So
was it an estate or was it an estate?
Yeah.
I don't know.
I did put a call into the National Party to clarify how she both grew up in a basically a state house and on a dairy farm, and they haven't got back to me yet. But
so
was it in trust that the house was? No, that's the second house is in a trust.
Yeah.
Look, good on anybody who actually got through the debate, because you would have needed a lot of coffee and whatnot to actually get through it. It was. I found.
I was on to my third Red Bull actually, mate. To be fair.
I found Jacinda Ardern. I actually did think she was lacking in energy. I think she was, giving Judith Collins a lot of leeway. I think Collins came out in the second half of that debate and something had changed. I think the gloves had come off and she was giving a good crack. From a if you're trying to learn anything about the election, I don't think that debate did a hell of a lot for you. And I hope that the rest of them get better.
So do you think, we've discussed this partly before, do you think that Jacinda Ardern's strategy and the strategy of the Labour team was the don't stuff it up strategy?
Yeah, must have been. Run down the clock. You're well ahead. I mean, sporting analogies every time, but you are massively ahead, aren't you? If it's 48-31, you're massively ahead. You want to run down the clock. You want to suck the energy out of it, basically. It was similar when it was Key against Gough in a similar sort of situation. And people can run around saying Judith Collins won the debate. That seemed to be the narrative that took hold. Yeah, maybe, but won what in the end? Do you think that really would have transferred any votes to national? In my view, no. It may have stopped the rot, and the narrative and momentum that you get from Judith Collins won the debate, maybe it's not all over. The media wants that to a degree because no one wants to say it's a foregone conclusion. Yeah. So there's a bit of that coming in, and she will have had some confidence from that. But I would doubt that many, if any, votes at all went transferred to national.
My first reaction after the debate and the first stuff I wrote afterwards was exactly that Collins won and had got a bit of momentum. Because I think everybody was just so surprised how poor Ardern was. I mean, this is a person who has supposedly been this inspirational leader for the past few years. I just suddenly saw that opposition MP we saw before she became Prime Minister again, policy wonkish, bureaucratish, never quite living up to her expectations kind of MP who just was flat, and she was so poor.
Well, they get,
so
and
poor.
which is you've complained about this in the past as a journalist that they don't want to debate each other, either politicians or spokespeople, and that's why, because they get reduced to the same level. You've been used to, even in Parliament, it's different. You don't actually have to debate them in Parliament. They ask you a question, then you stand from the platform. She's used to standing on the podium right throughout COVID and having it, her own way, and it's different when you're actually,
But you
side by side.
You look at those two women that night, and we'll say one of them's on 54 preferred Prime Minister rating, and it didn't look like Ardern.
And that was what probably surprised me a little bit. But then I guess she doesn't have to, right? She's sitting on 50. She's sitting on big numbers, so maybe then don't push it and don't stuff it up. Whereas the difference, I guess, up until now, Judith Collins has taken almost an approach of let's not criticise the Prime Minister because everyone loves her. And so I think what came through on that debate the other night was actually, well, now she's taken the gloves off. And there was a little bit of needling towards Jacinda Ardern. And I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens in the next one.
Yeah, I think there was a fair bit of needling, and I think the don't stuff it up approach would have actually taken a great deal of restraint when you're getting poke, all for 90 minutes. And I think the only little glimmer of I'm not taking this was when child poverty was raised, and that's when Jacinda Ardern, to a degree, bit back.
Let's have a listen to that bit.
Yeah, okay.
John, I am not done on child poverty. And you have a very stark difference between us as leaders over our plans in that area.
Right, stop.
That was really interesting because obviously this was her big platform in 2017. And in full nerd moment, I went back and watched some of her debates from 2017.
Right.
And in the News Hub one, she said, and I'm quoting her here.
Sorry, is this 2017 or 2018? This is from the last election.
From the last election, yeah, sorry. So my entire reason for being in politics is to rid this country of child poverty. That's a direct quote from her. So then to be having Judith Collins needling her on material hardship. So that's how many hot meals you get a week, how much protein is there, do you have 2 pairs of shoes, is there a place to do your homework, is there an internet connection in your house? To have Judith Collins point out that the numbers are not looking good there was a sore spot for her. But also in looking back at those debates, I saw a politician that had nothing to lose and was putting it all out there and going for it. And she was the one jumping in on Bill, as she called him. Bill. No, Bill, I'm going to have to pull you up on that, Bill. Bill, that's simply not true, Bill. Bill, why are you doing that now when we've been asking you to do that for 9 years, Bill? So she was playing a similar role to what Judith was playing this week.
And that was where my initial reaction was kind of good on Collins for doing better. But I've settled, I think, more where Guyan is now, that Collins needed a break moment, and National had the 2 chances this week with the tax cuts, which Goldsmith blew, and then with the first debate, which in the end, Collins, she was better than Ardern, but she didn't actually get what she needed out of it. There was no show me the money moment. There was nothing that the media is going to repeat for the next 4 news cycles every night. There was no, she didn't, and she had, why wasn't she banging on about $50 extra in a pocket, money in the pocket?
She didn't go to her policies.
No, electricity.
I heard more about the RMA.
Exactly, and you're going to be paying more for electricity under Labor. I thought that the electricity prices is a big one she could have gone to, and she went there once briefly.
I would have thought she would hammer the failure to deliver.
Yeah.
Kiwi Build, absolute failure. The child poverty progress failed to deliver. The housing waiting list has quadrupled. She did get to that, but I think she had lots of gaps in delivery.
But and infrastructure is a big point, and she let Ardern spend a couple of minutes talking about pumped blimmin' hydro, which no one at home would have known what she was talking about. And then she kept going on about wanting more water for avocado orchards. And John, I do you want more avocado orchards? I do. And I'm like, at that point, I just thought we've lost. Everyone's just gone down a rabbit hole here.
Yeah. There is a balance between bagging the other side and pointing out their failures and taking the opportunity to use the platform to promote what you would do and what your policies are. So there was obviously discussion about unemployment. Not once, unless I dropped into a snoozing situation, was there a mention of their policy to create jobs where if you're a business you can get $10,000 for creating a new job? There was no mention.
Got a bit of a look in, but then she started to say the jobs were there already.
But not the numbers. Weird. In 10 years they are promising to double the size of the tech sector from an $8 billion sector to a $16 billion sector.
Jobs
100,000 high-end jobs. So they're saying 100,000.
Doubling the employment workforce again.
There are the visa.
But she didn't float those. She didn't bring the numbers. She didn't hit the points on her policies.
Yeah, but in some ways, all she really had to do was stand at the podium and hold her own, and almost look as if she could be there, because we've had 6 months.
She doesn't have the time, Scott. She's only got a couple of weeks, and she's
but then the Jacinda Ardern did go into farming, right? And people picked up on this comment about, oh, well, that was the way of the past. And that's National's base, right? And a lot of those people who are probably National voters who have been sitting there going, oh, who's the leader this week, might be actually sitting there going, oh, well, she actually makes sense. Maybe we can vote for her.
Yeah, there's something. Yeah. Look. It got the base. I think the National Party base would have been reassured that if the sense that maybe Collins was going a bit soft, that maybe National was being that too centrist, not actually fighting for their corner, that she got a little bit of fight out there.
I hate to bring Uber driver wisdom into this, but I jumped into Uber the
but
next
you're going
morning,
to anyway.
And the guy said, look, I've been a National voter, loved John Key, thought he was a guy who could turn $1 into $2, didn't really like Labour or trust them on the economy. Who was he going to vote for? Labour. Why? He said the mosque attack response and the COVID response. They deserve another turn. And, I've come back to this in our caucus sessions quite a bit. To me, it's not a lot more complicated than that. I think
it's hard to get past those two.
The crisis response of the government in times where people felt very vulnerable and lives were at stake, big time stuff, not 35 versus 36% of GDP, but my God, am I going to be alive? Am I going to have a job? I feel vulnerable. That's where Labour has given them comfort, and it says two things to me. They could and may well, in the next term, lose those votes. That 10 or 15% they've clawed across.
They are circumstantial.
Under a stronger national leader and a party that's got their act together in a better way, they could lose those votes just as easily as they've picked them up. But from what I can see, it ain't going to be this time.
It's funny you raise that, because that is the place that Jacinda Ardern went right at the end of the debate. When she had the final opportunity to say something, we saw the communicator and orator that we perhaps have seen earlier in her term. And she said that, there's been tough times for New Zealand. We have seen the best of us. And she referenced those disasters that you've just talked about and said, we're stronger and better for where we've been. And she went to her campaign slogan there and finished on that. But she drew on that emotion and that kind of personal empathy and sympathy that you're kind of talking about. That's where she put a full stop right there, right at the end. And that's the one time where I thought she had the upper hand on Judith.
Yeah, and we might sort of mull over all of the numbers and all of the policies and all those bits and pieces, but the reality is, in 8 days, 19 hours, 2 minutes and 10 seconds, are people who tick that early box actually going to worry about it?
Hey, before you go, what are you betting us? You reckon the Greens are out. So what's on the table here? What, a block of chocolate, $10? What do we reckon?
A bottle of kombucha.
Oh, Jimmy, okay.
Jimmy the plant. So
we
people
win
watching
the
on
plant.
YouTube, there is a plant behind Scott's left shoulder, which we have nicknamed Jimmy.
And it's a peace lily, I think.
And it's looking healthier than it was 6 or 8 weeks ago when we started.
He got it from the Green School, in one of those crystal planting things.
Okay.
I believe I had to bet my mortgage to that the Greens would double down on tax before the election. So do I still get to keep that after Julian Gent this week?
You're mortgage free, mate. So it doesn't cost you anything.
Not yet.
I'm looking for. Okay, so the plant's on the line.
Right, looking for the plant. Next week, everybody, we have more debates. Maori TV has its Te Tai Hauru debate on Tuesday night. The News Hub Leaders debate with Paddy Gower is on Wednesday night. If you're in Auckland, the preeminent community debate in Epsom is on Tuesday night, hosted by me. This is my plug. At Somerville Presbyterian Church on Tuesday night, 7:30, corner of Remuera Road and Green Lane East. David Seymour, Paul Goldsmith will all be there. I'm hosting that. Come and see me. You can watch this on YouTube, as I say. You can get the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google. We'll be back next Thursday morning, straight after the News Hub Leaders debate, and see whether they do any better next time. Thanks, guys. Mā te wā.